Major League Baseball and their players agreed to a trio of rule changes for the 2023 season and beyond that have been tried and tested in the minor leagues. Changes that, according to Rob Manfred, received overwhelming support among our fans. So what changes did MLB make? Did they finally commit to robot umps so Angel Hernandez doesn't have to strain his eyes anymore from all that squinting he does behind home plate?
You stink, and I don't like you!
Did they lower the cost of ever-rising ticket prices to make it more affordable for a family of 4 to attend a Major League ballpark? Did they finally get rid of blackouts so fans across the country can, consume their product? Nope. They decided to implement 2 radical changes that definitely don't lead to heated debates on the internet. Oh, and they added bigger bases too because
there are so many reasons.
To put it simply, MLB's goal is more action in less time to counter a trend that, according to Tom Verducci of Sports Illustrated, saw baseball lose 11 million paid customers from the height of attendance in 2007-2019, the last pre-COVID season. That is a major league problem. But with these rule changes, did MLB and its players take a step forward towards solving that problem? Are they even addressing the core issues at hand? Well, I'll try to examine the structure of these 3 new rules as well as highlight different opinions I found from players, coaches, and you guys the fans, so you can try to better understand the magnitude of these rule changes. But before we continue, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to your favorite torta. Let's start with bigger bases, the easiest and least controversial of the new rules. With the intended goal of improving player safety, the bases, not including home plate, will increase from 15 square inches to 18 square inches. This is presumably to avoid player collisions like these, or injuries like these, or maybe to try to prevent freaky shit like this from happening. And MLB.com mentions it could help with oversliding, though Tom Verducci sees it as a way to encourage stolen bases. This is because the distance between first and second base, as well as the distance between second and third base, decreases by 4.5 inches. Look at it like this. According to Baseball Savant, the average sprint speed that a runner reaches is 27 feet per second. Doing some basic math, with a 4.5 inch reduction in base distance, in other words, a 0.375 foot reduction, if Max Muncy were to steal second base, he would get to second base 1.4 hundredths of a second quicker. Now that might not sound like much, but we know now more than ever, with the advent of instant replay, a fraction of a second is monumental. As for the injury aspect, I can see a bigger base helping at first base for sure. That change should have actually happened a long time ago. However, I am a little more skeptical about how many injuries it will reduce at the other 2 bases. I don't think a few more inches drastically changes things when you're dealing with such a fragile joint, like the wrist or a finger. But according to MLB's presser, base-related injuries decreased 13% in the minors, with declines at every level of the minor leagues with bigger bases. So that's encouraging. And honestly, I think it's one of those little things that will probably go unnoticed.
That's a really simple way to add a few stolen bases a year.
One thing that definitely won't go unnoticed, because it'll be right there in the middle of your screen, the pitch timer. A pitch timer has 2 goals, to improve pace of play and reduce dead time.
Oh yeah!
So MLB first tested the pitch timer during the Arizona Fall League in 2014, and has been tweaking it in the minors ever since. So in 2023, there will be a 30-second timer between batters. There will be a 15-second timer with bases empty, and a 20-second timer with runners on base. In the minor leagues, it was actually shorter, and in the minor leagues, this reduced the average game by a whopping 26 minutes. The pitcher must begin his delivery before the pitch timer expires. If they violate the timer, the pitch becomes an automatic ball. The batter has to be in the box and alert by the 8-second mark, or the pitch becomes an automatic strike.
Woods getting called out.
If the umpire has a vendetta against a player, he could be a real douchebag about this, if he's not already when it comes to calling balls and strikes. Or what if some dick in center field decides to shine a light or something to distract the batter at the 8-second mark? Will the umpire say the batter was an alert then and call an automatic strike? The batter also gets 1 timeout per plate appearance.
Bullshit!
Umpires may give extra time under special circumstances.
Terry!
MLB uses the example of a catcher being the final out to end the previous half inning. At that point, the umpire can grant extra time at his discretion so the catcher can put his gear on. Again, it's another one of those judgment calls left up to the umpire. And we've seen how that worked out with the runner down the first baseline, check swings, and hell, calling balls and strikes. But this is Major League Baseball's brainchild, so what could go wrong?
So I have to get my manager a Segway to get to the mound. Mound visits can only be 30 seconds.
Another element of the pitch timer is something that I've actually been 100% behind for a while now, and it's this thing called disengagement. A pitcher gets 2 disengagements, a pickoff attempt and or a step-off, per plate appearance for the runner on base. He can use a 3rd disengagement to try to pick off the runner, but if he doesn't pick the runner off, the runner automatically advances to the next base, essentially a balk. If the runner does advance during the plate appearance and one or both disengagements had been used, this resets so the pitcher gets 2 disengagements again. The pitch timer also resets if the pitcher attempts a pickoff or steps off the rubber.
With no one on base, the clock keeps running.
I don't think baseball is boring at all, but if I were to name one aspect of it that I do think is downright irritating is when you have a pitcher who doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and he makes a half-hearted pickoff attempt with Albert Pujols on first base when you know obviously he's not going to go.
Get a check on Albert. Right, good idea.
So maybe it does encourage more action on the base paths, but as AJ Hinch points out, you still have to have some athleticism on your team to steal bases. For example, the San Francisco Giants aren't all of a sudden going to steal 100 bases with the new rules. Jimmy Lambert of the White Sox simply notes that pitchers are just going to have to learn to be faster to the plate, and manager Mark Kotsay of the A's is not a fan because in his words, it'll make it really difficult to control the running game if your pitching staff isn't adequately getting the baseball to the plate in a good enough time. No offense, but a failure to control the running game is the least of Oakland's problems right now. To give you some more context on the pitch timer, MLB claims that in this past week before announcing the rule changes, there was only an average of 0.45 violations per game in the minor leagues. Obviously, there is going to be an adjustment period. I imagine they'll expose the big leaguers to this in spring training, but we're probably going to get a bunch of memes early on next season. However you feel about the pitch timer though, and I've expressed that it wouldn't have been my preferred route, you do have to try to understand what Major League Baseball is trying to accomplish here. The average time of game in 2021 was an all-time high 3 hours and 11 minutes. The last time that an average Major League game lasted less than 3 hours was back in 2011. Obviously, like you and I, not everyone in the major leagues is on board with the pitch timer. That's why the players unanimously voted against implementing it.
Great. I mean, the players didn't agree to it, right? We all voted against it, and the MLB did it anyway.
But there are other guys, such as Matt Carpenter and Caleb Ferguson, who actually pitched in AAA this season, that grew to like the pitch timer, but believe it might need a few tweaks at the big league level. Graham Ashcraft of the Cincinnati Reds believes that games can be even faster up here in the big leagues when you combine the new rules with pitch comp. As Ferguson puts it, you don't want a pitch clock running out of time being the reason you lose a game. Here's the truth, folks. Baseball will never be like gridiron football. It'll definitely never be anything like basketball, even though it tried and hilariously failed earlier this summer. But to me, that's the difference between watching a Michael Bay film and a Quentin Tarantino film. The experience is totally different, but Tarantino forces you to think along with the film and really get those gears in your brain going, which is the same in baseball, and it's part of the reason why it has always fascinated me.
How can you not be romantic about baseball?
But I also acknowledge that we probably shouldn't have players just doing this.
Well, Odubel's in no hurry, is he?
He is on his own game plan, own time.
Just because they can. If there's a chance to improve, I believe we should always make the most of that opportunity.
It's sped up games, there's no question about it. And I think that ultimately is a good thing for everybody.
I'm a proponent of the time clock for sure. I think that's going to be a good thing, and I do think players will adjust.
You know, if they want to speed up the game, that's great. But if it affects the way I pitch, I don't like it.
And finally, banning the shift. It's not technically banning the shift, they're restricting the way infielders align, but personally, I just don't care much for it. But let's get to the details of it. MLB's official statement reads like this. A set of restrictions will return the game to a more traditional aesthetic by governing defensive shifts, with the goals of giving players more opportunities to showcase their athleticism, encouraging more balls in play, and offsetting the growing trend of alignments that feature 4 outfielders. I don't know, maybe if Major League Baseball wants to bring the game to a more traditional aesthetic, maybe they shouldn't show gambling odds on Apple TV Plus broadcasts, or hell, maybe they shouldn't even have a Major League broadcast on Apple TV Plus in the first place.
Wow!
And I don't know, as far as I know, there's only a select group of players that they use 4-man outfields for. And who says that players can't show athleticism in the shift? But MLB maybe has a point about balls in play. Mr. Verducci notes that in 1985, a ball was put in play every 2 minutes and 50 seconds, while the average game saw almost 58 balls in play. In 2022 so far, there have only been an average of 49 balls put in play per game, and they happen every 3 minutes and 49 seconds, a whole minute slower. And when balls are put in play, there's a good chance this will happen.
Rock ball to Perdomo, the third baseman on the right side.
And I know some people like Terry Francona will say, just hit the ball the other way, all the while pissing off some people like Tucker Barnhart who don't want to hear that. But it seems that players would prefer the extreme shift as we know it went away.
hopefully create a little bit more offense.
You know, to get the ball hard and get out there, get it past kind of the first line of defense, and you want it to be a hit.
Like for the quality of the game, seeing more ground balls get through is probably a good thing.
Max Muncy, who shifted in about 90% of his plate appearances and traditionally performs way better without the shift, though this season it's actually the other way around, expresses that you should get rewarded if you hit a hard line drive, but not if you roll over a weak grounder. So did MLB achieve this with its new shift guidelines? Well, its first guideline is known as lateral positioning. Under this, there must be a minimum of 4 defensive players on the infield, with at least 2 infielders positioned on either side of second base when the pitch is released. All 4 infielders must have both feet within the outer boundary of the infield when the pitcher is on the rubber. This is called depth. And infielders cannot switch sides unless there is a substitution. So we get no more plays like this anymore.
Oh, over the shoulder catch made down the right field line. How about that play?
If the infielders aren't aligned properly, which means they don't have both cleats in the dirt at the time of the pitch, this results in either an automatic ball or the result of the play.
And you say, you know what? I don't want the sacrifice fly. Take the run off the board. I need the base hit because I need 2 runs. There's a whole level of strategy right now that front offices are going to have to deal with.
Of course, this could quickly turn on Major League Baseball's initiative to speed the game up. Because what if a manager challenges whether the opposing infielder's cleats were actually in the dirt or not? It opens up the same can of worms brought about by instant replay when they check if a runner came off the base for a millisecond.
Now we're talking about, things that are going to be challenged, things that are going to have to be reset. So you're taking time at one end, but giving time at the other.
So under these guidelines, the defense could still put an outfielder in the infield or in the shallow outfield grass, but it absolutely bans 4 outfielder alignments.
Trout hits one to deep center. And gone.
According to MLB's presser, 4-man outfield alignments actually increased almost 6 times in usage since the beginning of the 2018 season. And actually going off total pitches thrown during a 4-man outfield shift, these shifts have increased 7.25 times in usage compared to 2018. So I guess, yeah, I was wrong. Like at A-Dip Shelley points out, Joey Gallo's about to become a 400 hitter. And so yeah, we've heard from current players and coaches. You've heard my rambles obviously, but what did some of you guys, the fans, say? Because if Major League Baseball claims that their strategy has overwhelming support amongst the fans, I feel it's only fair we hear from them, right? Of course, there were bound to be those that didn't have much to say other than W or L. Some were just there for the comments. And then of course you have your dipshits trolling on YouTube like this dumbass right here. But I found a few of these comments pretty insightful. For example, on YouTube, Mr. The Big Nose believes a pitch clock is severely needed due to pitchers and batters taking too long to get set. Joyfire I Want Sex Lips F-Uck Me saw several minor league games with the pitch clock, with one game lasting less than 2 hours, and believes that it helped pitchers get into a rhythm and made them more effective. Top Pink Official raises the real concerns, that we'll have less time to drink. And Stero wants the widow babies to go get their little blankies and stuffed animals baby emoji. Some of the elite actually got in on this too. For example, former Red Scooter Jeanette comments bigger bases crying laughing emoji. Former Texas second baseman Ian Kinsler draws skepticism that the bigger bases are only for safety and believes if that were the case, they should have made first base the only oversized base. Fellow Texas Ranger CJ Wilson shares the same sentiment as his former teammate in that he believes only first base should be bigger. He brings up a point that killing defensive shifts will only increase offense and thus increase length of game. Wilson concludes that the pitch clock will lead to more starting pitcher injuries and that umpires blow enough strike zone calls already. They'll overheat with a faster pace. And I was recently watching a Baltimore Orioles game where the analyst talked about limiting the manager to a certain number of defensive shifts per game, similar to mound visits and replay challenges. And I actually found that to be quite interesting. It would have opened up the door for so many possibilities in terms of strategy and in-game managing. I would have preferred to see that tried first instead of what we actually got, but it is what it is. And I do want to emphasize that we probably should see these rules in action before we knock them, because I'll be the first to admit I don't watch minor league baseball, but I can't sit here in good faith and lie to you and say, I watched the games and they suck, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. No, we get enough of that shit with the talking heads on television today.
The Braves are boring, the ballpark's boring. Let's face it, we all know this. The Dodgers are going to win this thing in 5 games or less.
As AJ Hinch pleads, let's see it before we critique it. A positive development for this is that maybe teams do start placing more value on infielders with more range. Players might finally get paid for their defensive prowess as much as their offensive abilities, and maybe teams start paying more for stolen bases, and similarly pay more for a battery that is able to control the running game. When asked if he thinks the new rule changes will affect how clubs construct their rosters, Dodgers manager Dave Roberts slyly smirked and responded founded. I don't want to give kind of inside dope, but I do. I think the smart ones will.
And teams are better at it than others. You know, we do a really great job with our shifts. Some teams are really old school and don't shift, and so we get to take advantage of that. You know, there's a competitive advantage with that.
And that's the whole point of it all. The Dodgers, who shift 17% more than the average Major League team and shift more effectively, won't suddenly start losing ball games because they can't put a man short right field against a pull-heavy lefty. As the father of sabermetrics, Bill James once said, one form of ignorance will always replace another. There will always be smart teams and dumb teams. In other words, the Angels are still gonna angel.
Intentional walk granted to Seager with the bases loaded.
And Major League Baseball now has the ball in their court, but they also have a huge target on their backs because they can implement whatever rules they want, but if they aren't enforced, then what's the point? And traditionally, Major League Baseball does not have a great track record when it comes to enforcing its own rules, as you can learn about in my little video on the international draft. If you liked this video and want to see more content like this, please consider watching my brand new Bush League series, where I try to explore the scandalous side of Major League Baseball, plus random baseball stuff that I find interesting. And please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to your favorite torta.
And the 2-2 again. And a weakly hit ground ball to third. Devers will get Guerrero. Springer holds. Bichette to second.